The thundering hooves of a desperate rider echoed through the canyon as dawn broke over the rugged landscape of 1872 Wyoming Territory. Rosa Esposito clung to the saddle, her knuckles white, her heart racing as fast as the stolen horse beneath her. 3 days ago, she had escaped from a band of men who had promised her passage to America from Italy, only to discover their true intentions once they reached the frontier. Now she rode without direction, without understanding, without even the ability to call for help in a language anyone would comprehend. The mountain air cut through her thin blouse as Rosa guided the horse through a narrow pass. Her dark hair whipped behind her, tangled and wild from days of hard riding. She had no food, little water, and the certainty that the men she'd fled would not give up their pursuit easily. The promise of a new life in America, a job as a seamstress for a wealthy family in New York, had turned to ash in her mouth. When the horse stumbled on the rocky trail, Rosa felt herself pitching forward. She tried to right herself, but exhaustion had taken its toll. The ground rushed up to meet her as the horse bolted, leaving her sprawled in the dirt, the taste of blood in her mouth from a split lip. She pushed herself up, wincing at the pain in her wrist, and looked around at the vast emptiness of the Wyoming wilderness. "Ayudo," she whispered, knowing no one would hear her plea for help. "Per favor." Rosa gathered herself up and began walking, following the trail downward, hoping it would lead to water, to civilization, to anything but the emptiness that surrounded her. The sun climbed higher, beating down on her shoulders as she stumbled forward, one foot in front of the other. By midday, the trail had widened, and Rosa could make out what appeared to be wheel tracks in the dust. Her spirits lifted momentarily before a new sound froze her in place: hoofbeats, approaching fast. Panic seized her as she looked for somewhere to hide, but the landscape offered little cover. When she spotted the riders cresting the hill behind her, she broke into a run, her legs burning with the effort. The riders gained on her quickly. Rosa's breath came in ragged gasps as she pushed herself harder, knowing it was futile. When a rope sailed through the air and circled her waist, yanking her backward, she screamed, a sound that needed no translation. She hit the ground hard, the air rushing from her lungs. As she struggled to breathe, a shadow fell across her. Rosa looked up, expecting to see the faces of her pursuers, but instead found herself staring into the eyes of a stranger, a man on horseback wearing a wide-brimmed hat, his face weathered by sun and wind. "Whoa there," he said, his voice low and calm. "Easy now." Rosa scrambled backward, her hands scrabbling in the dirt as she tried to put distance between herself and this new threat. She spoke rapidly in Italian, begging him to let her go, to not hurt her, to understand she had done nothing wrong. The man dismounted, moving slowly, his hands held where she could see them. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a face that might have been handsome before the years had carved lines into it. He didn't look like the men who had brought her west. There was something different in his eyes. "I don't understand a word you're saying, madam," he said, "but it seems to me you're in some kind of trouble." Rosa continued to back away, her words tumbling out in a desperate stream. The man stopped, considering her for a moment before reaching slowly into his saddlebag. Rosa tensed, ready to run again, but he pulled out only a canteen which he offered to her. "Water," he said, making a drinking motion. "Agua, is that right?" Rosa hesitated, her thirst warring with her fear. Finally, she reached for the canteen, careful to keep her distance as she took it from him. The water was warm but clean, and she drank deeply. "Thank you," she said in heavily accented English, one of the few phrases she knew. The man's face brightened. "You speak English?" Rosa shook her head. "Little," she managed, holding her thumb and forefinger close together to indicate how little. "My name is Isaiah Quinn," he said, touching his chest. "Isaiah." He pointed at her questioningly. "Rosa," she replied cautiously. "Rosa Esposito." A shout in the distance made them both turn. 3 riders had appeared on the horizon, and Rosa's face drained of color. She grabbed Isaiah's arm, her fear evident. "Bad men," she said, one of the English phrases she had learned on the journey west. Bad men. Isaiah Quinn had been a rancher for 15 years, a soldier before that, and had seen enough of the world to recognize trouble when it rode his way. He looked from the approaching riders to the terrified woman before him and made a quick decision. "Come with me," he said, offering her his hand. When she hesitated, he pointed to the riders, then to her, making a motion like hands bound together. "They want to hurt you." Rosa nodded frantically. "Then we need to go," Isaiah said, helping her onto his horse before mounting behind her. "Now." He turned his horse toward a stand of trees in the distance, urging the animal into a gallop. Rosa sat rigidly in front of him, her body tense with fear, but she didn't fight his guidance. As they rode, Isaiah could hear the shouts of the men behind them growing fainter. The trees gave way to a narrow ravine that Isaiah knew well. He followed it for nearly a mile before the landscape opened up to reveal a small ranch house nestled against the base of a bluff. Smoke rose from the chimney, and a corral to one side held several horses. Isaiah slowed his mount as they approached, aware of the woman's confusion. "My home," he said, pointing to the ranch house. "Safe." He helped Rosa down from the horse and led her toward the house. The door opened as they approached, revealing a young man with a shock of red hair and freckles scattered across his face. "Mr. Quinn," the young man said, his eyes widening at the sight of Rosa. "Wasn't expecting you back so soon." "Change of plans, Theo," Isaiah replied. "We've got company and maybe trouble following." "Get the rifle ready, would you?" Theo nodded, disappearing back into the house as Isaiah guided Rosa inside. The interior was simple but clean: a main room with a stone fireplace, a wooden table with chairs, a few shelves lined with books. A hallway led to what Rosa assumed were bedrooms. "Sit," Isaiah said, gesturing to a chair. "Rest." Rosa sank gratefully into the chair, her legs finally giving out beneath her. Isaiah moved to a cupboard, returning with a loaf of bread and some dried meat. He set them before her, along with a cup of water. "Eat," he said. Rosa needed no encouragement. She tore into the bread, her hunger overwhelming her caution. As she ate, Isaiah moved to the window, watching for any sign of pursuit. "Mr. Quinn," Theo said quietly, joining him at the window. "Who is she?" "Name's Rosa," Isaiah replied. "Found her on the trail being chased by some rough-looking men. She doesn't speak much English, sounds like Italian to me, though I can't be sure." "What are you going to do with her?" Isaiah ran a hand through his graying hair. "Not sure yet. First, we make sure those men don't find her. Then we figure out where she belongs." Rosa watched their conversation, understanding none of it but studying their expressions. When Isaiah turned back to her, she straightened, her wariness returning. "Rest," he said again, pointing to a chair near the fire. "Safe here." As night fell, Isaiah set up a makeshift bed for Rosa in a small room off the main living area. It was barely more than a storage space, but it had a window and a door that closed. He showed her how to lock it from the inside, hoping the gesture would reassure her. "Sleep," he said. "Morning we talk." Rosa nodded, her exhaustion evident in the dark circles beneath her eyes. She closed the door behind him, and Isaiah heard the lock click into place. He stood for a moment outside her door, wondering what circumstances had brought this woman to his doorstep and what he was supposed to do about it. In the main room, Theo had taken up position by the window with a rifle across his lap. "I'll take first watch," Isaiah told him. "You get some sleep." You sure, boss? You look beat. I'm fine. We'll switch in 4 hours. As Theo disappeared into his small room off the kitchen, Isaiah settled into a chair by the window, his revolver on the table beside him. The night was quiet except for the occasional call of a coyote in the distance. He found himself thinking about the woman sleeping just a few yards away, her fear, her determination, the way she had looked at him with both hope and suspicion. Isaiah had lived alone on this ranch since his wife died 7 years ago. Their marriage had been brief but happy, ended too soon by a fever that had swept through the territory. He had hired hands to help with the cattle, but none of them lived in the main house. It had been just him for a long time now, and he had grown accustomed to the solitude. Having a woman under his roof again felt strange, unsettling in ways he couldn't quite name. Morning came with no sign of Rosa's pursuers. Isaiah had just put coffee on to boil when the door to the small room opened, and Rosa emerged. She had washed her face and tied back her dark hair with a strip of fabric torn from her petticoat. In the morning light, Isaiah could see she was younger than he had initially thought, perhaps 25 to his 38 years. "Good morning," he said, offering her a tentative smile. "Coffee?" Rosa nodded, taking a seat at the table. She watched as he poured the dark liquid into 2 tin cups, sliding one toward her. She wrapped her hands around it, savoring the warmth. "Thank you," she said in her limited English. Isaiah sat across from her, considering how to bridge the vast language barrier between them. He pointed to himself. "Isaiah," then to her. "Rosa," she nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Isaiah," she repeated, then pointed outside. "Where?" Isaiah understood she was asking where they were. "Wyoming," he said, "near Dillon." When she looked confused, he added, "America." "America," she repeated, nodding. She seemed to be thinking, searching for words. Finally, she pointed to herself. "Italy," she said. "Roma." "Rome?" Isaiah asked. "You're from Rome, Italy." Rosa nodded, her face brightening at his understanding. She pantomimed writing, and Isaiah quickly fetched paper and a pencil. Rosa sketched a rough map, pointing to Italy, then drawing a line across the ocean to America, then another line westward. "You came across the ocean," Isaiah said, following her drawing. "Then west." Rosa nodded emphatically, then her expression darkened. She drew crude figures of men, then made a grabbing motion with her hands. "Bad men," she said. Isaiah understood then she had been brought west, perhaps against her will, by men who meant her harm. It was a story he had heard before, of immigrants lured with promises, only to find themselves in situations far different from what they had been led to expect. "You're safe here," he said, knowing she wouldn't understand the words but hoping his tone would convey his meaning. "Those men won't find you." Rosa studied his face, as if trying to read the truth in his eyes. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her. Because she nodded and took a sip of her coffee, Theo entered the kitchen, his red hair sticking up at odd angles from sleep. "Morning," he said, nodding to Rosa. "No sign of those fellows from yesterday." "Good," Isaiah replied. "Let's hope it stays that way." Over the next few days, a routine developed. Isaiah would work the ranch during the day while Rosa stayed close to the house. She had taken over the cooking without being asked, preparing simple but flavorful meals that were a welcome change from Isaiah and Theo's basic fare. In the evenings, Isaiah would try to teach Rosa English words, and she would respond with their Italian equivalents. "Chair," Isaiah would say, pointing. "Sedia," Rosa would reply, then repeat, "chair." They built a small vocabulary this way, simple words for everyday objects and actions. Isaiah found himself looking forward to these sessions, enjoying the way Rosa's face lit up when she mastered a new word. A week after Rosa's arrival, Isaiah rode into Dillon to see if he could learn anything about the men who had been pursuing her. The town was small, just a main street with a general store, a saloon, a small church, and a handful of other businesses. He tied his horse outside the general store and went inside to find Mrs. Perkins, the owner's wife, arranging bolts of fabric on a shelf. "Good morning, Mr. Quinn," she said, smiling warmly. "What brings you to town today?" "Just picking up supplies," Isaiah replied, lifting his hat briefly in greeting. "And wondering if you've heard anything about strangers passing through 3 men, rough-looking types." Mrs. Perkins's expression grew serious. "As a matter of fact, there were 3 men in here 2 days ago asking questions. Not local, that's for certain. They had an accent I couldn't quite place." Isaiah felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of questions? They were looking for a young woman, dark hair, Italian, they said. Claimed she was a relative who had wandered off, but something about them didn't sit right with me. Sheriff Hollister thought the same, kept an eye on them until they left town. "Did they say where they were headed?" Mrs. Perkins shook her head. "No, but they were asking about ranches in the area. I didn't mention yours specifically, but they might have heard about it elsewhere." Isaiah thanked her and quickly gathered the supplies he needed. As he loaded them onto his horse, he scanned the street for any sign of the men Mrs. Perkins had described. The town seemed quiet, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were still nearby, waiting. He rode back to the ranch at a faster pace than usual, relief washing over him when he saw the house still standing peacefully in the afternoon sun. Rosa was hanging laundry on a line strung between 2 posts, her dark hair tied back with one of the ribbons Isaiah had brought her from town the previous week. She looked up as he approached, a smile spreading across her face. "Isaiah," she called, waving. Isaiah dismounted, leading his horse to the water trough before joining her by the laundry line. "Rosa," he said, his tone serious. "The men bad men, they were in town." Rosa's smile disappeared, replaced by fear. She glanced toward the horizon as if expecting to see riders approaching. "Not here," Isaiah assured her quickly, "but they're looking for you." Rosa seemed to understand his meaning. She nodded, her jaw set determinedly. "I stay here?" she asked, her English improving daily. Isaiah hesitated. The safest thing might be for Rosa to move on, to go to a larger town where she might find other Italians, perhaps even a way back east. But the thought of sending her away made his chest tighten unexpectedly. "Yes," he said finally. "You stay here, safe." The relief in Rosa's eyes made something shift inside Isaiah, a feeling he had thought long buried with his wife. He turned away quickly, busying himself with the supplies he had brought from town. "I brought something for you," he said, retrieving a small package wrapped in brown paper. He held it out to her, for English. Rosa took the package, unwrapping it carefully to reveal a small book with colorful illustrations. "English words," Isaiah explained, opening it to show her simple pictures with English labels beneath them. Rosa's eyes widened with delight. She clutched the book to her chest, then impulsively reached out to touch Isaiah's arm. "Thank you," she said, the words clear and heartfelt. Isaiah felt a warmth spread through him at her touch. "You're welcome," he replied, his voice rougher than he intended. That night, after Theo had gone to bed, Isaiah found Rosa sitting by the fire, carefully studying the book he had given her. He sat down across from her, watching as she mouthed the words to herself. "Rosa," he said softly, drawing her attention, "why did you come to America?" She looked at him, confused by the complexity of the question. Isaiah pointed to her, then made a motion like crossing the ocean, then pointed to the ground. "Why here?" he asked simply. Rosa set down the book and seemed to be gathering her thoughts. "Work," she said finally, mimicking sewing. "Dressmaking." She pantomimed counting money, then sending it somewhere. Family, she added, her expression growing sad. Mater, padre, fratelli, she stopped, realizing he wouldn't understand. Mother, father, brothers, she translated haltingly. Isaiah nodded, understanding. She had come to America to work and send money back to her family in Italy. It was a common enough story among immigrants. The bad men, he said, his expression darkening. They brought you west, Rosa nodded, her own face clouding with the memory. Promise work, she said. Lie. She made a motion like someone grabbing her, then pushed her hands away forcefully. I run. Isaiah felt a surge of anger at what she had endured. You're brave, he said, knowing she might not understand the word but hoping his admiration would be clear. Rosa smiled faintly, then pointed to him. Why help? She asked. The question caught Isaiah off guard. Why had he helped her? It had been instinct, seeing a woman in trouble, but there was something in her eyes that had called to him from the moment they met. It was the right thing to do, he said simply, then realizing she wouldn't understand, added, good. He pointed to his heart. Here. Rosa studied him for a long moment, then nodded as if she had confirmed something important. Good heart, she said, pointing to his chest. Isaiah, good heart. Isaiah felt something shift between them in that moment, a recognition that went beyond words. They sat in comfortable silence until the fire began to die down, then said their good nights, each retreating to their separate rooms with much to think about. The next morning, Isaiah woke to the sound of hoofbeats approaching the ranch. He grabbed his revolver and was out of bed in an instant, pulling on his pants as he moved to the window. 3 riders were approaching from the east, not the direction of town. Isaiah recognized them immediately as hands from the neighboring ranch. He let out a breath of relief and tucked the revolver into his waistband before heading outside to greet them. By the time he reached the porch, Rosa and Theo had also emerged from the house, Rosa standing slightly behind Theo as if for protection. Morning, Quinn, called the lead rider, a grizzled man named Hank whom Isaiah had known for years. Got some news you might want to hear. What's that? Isaiah asked, stepping off the porch to meet them. 3 strangers been asking around about a woman, Hank said, his eyes flicking to Rosa briefly. Italians, they said. Got themselves in some trouble over at Wilkins's place yesterday, tried to strong-arm information out of his daughter when they found her alone. Isaiah felt his muscles tense. Anyone hurt? Wilkins got back before they could do any real harm, ran them off with a shotgun. Sheriff's out looking for them now, but thought you should know they were heading this way last anyone saw. Isaiah nodded, his mind racing. Thanks for the warning, Hank. That her? Hank asked, nodding toward Rosa, who was watching the exchange with wary eyes. The Italian girl they're after. Isaiah hesitated, then nodded. She's under my protection, he said firmly. Hank raised his hands. None of my business, Quinn. Just thought you should be prepared is all. After Hank and his men had ridden off, Isaiah turned to Rosa and Theo. We need to be ready, he said. Theo, check all the guns, make sure they're loaded. Rosa, he paused, realizing she might not understand what was happening. He pointed in the direction the riders had come from. Bad men coming maybe. Rosa's face paled, but she nodded resolutely. She went back into the house and returned moments later with a knife she had taken from the kitchen. She held it with a grip that suggested she knew how to use it. Isaiah shook his head. No, he said firmly, taking the knife from her. Too dangerous. He led her to a small cellar door at the back of the house, opening it to reveal a space beneath the kitchen used for storing preserved food. Hide, he said, pointing to the cellar. Men come, you hide. Rosa looked like she wanted to argue, but finally nodded. Isaiah showed her how to secure the cellar door from the inside, then left her to prepare for what might come. The day passed slowly, tension building with each hour. By mid-afternoon, Isaiah had begun to hope that perhaps the men had been apprehended by the sheriff or had given up their search. Then Theo, who had been keeping watch from an upstairs window, called out softly, "Riders coming, Mr. Quinn. 3 of them." Isaiah moved to the window, his heart sinking as he recognized the men Rosa had fled from. They approached slowly, warily, clearly aware that they might not be welcome. Isaiah turned to Rosa, who had joined him at the window, her face set in determination. "Cellar," he said firmly. Now, Rosa shook her head. "Stay," she said. "Help?" "No," Isaiah replied, his tone brooking no argument. "Too dangerous, please." Something in his expression must have convinced her, because Rosa finally nodded and headed for the cellar. Once he was sure she was safely hidden, Isaiah positioned Theo at the back of the house while he went to the front porch, rifle in hand but not raised. The 3 men stopped their horses a good distance from the house, clearly recognizing the threat in Isaiah's stance. "Afternoon," called the leader, a swarthy man with a thick mustache and an accent Isaiah couldn't quite place, not Italian, but something similar. "We're looking for a young woman who might have passed this way. Dark hair, Italian, name's Rosa Esposito." "Haven't seen her," Isaiah replied evenly. "You'd best move on." The man smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "We heard differently in town. Heard you brought a young woman to your ranch about a week ago. That sound about right." Isaiah kept his expression neutral. "I don't know what you heard, but there's no woman here except my housekeeper, and she's 60 if she's a day." The lie came easily, born of necessity. The 3 men exchanged glances. "Mind if we take a look around?" asked the leader. "Just to be sure." "I mind very much," Isaiah said, shifting his rifle slightly so the barrel caught the sunlight. "This is private property." The leader's face hardened. "The girl is our property," he said, dropping all pretense. "She was contracted to work for us, and she ran off before fulfilling her obligations." Isaiah felt a cold anger settle in his chest. "People aren't property," he said quietly. "Not here, not anymore." "You've got no right to interfere in our business," the man snarled, his hand moving toward his holster. Isaiah raised his rifle smoothly, aiming it at the man's chest. "I'm giving you one chance to leave peacefully," he said. "Take it." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then the leader slowly raised his hands. "This isn't over," he said. "We'll be back with the law." "The law?" Isaiah almost laughed. "Sheriff Hollister is already looking for you boys after what you tried at Wilkins's place. I don't think you want to meet him." The mention of the sheriff seemed to give the men pause. The leader scowled, but finally signaled to his companions to turn their horses. "We'll be watching," he called over his shoulder as they rode away. Isaiah watched until they disappeared from view, then let out a long breath. He didn't believe for a moment that they had given up, only that they were regrouping, perhaps waiting for darkness. He went to the cellar door and knocked softly. "Rosa, it's safe now." The door opened slowly, Rosa's pale face appearing in the dim light. "They gone?" she asked. "For now," Isaiah replied, helping her up, "but they'll be back." Rosa's eyes filled with fear, but she straightened her shoulders resolutely. "What we do?" Isaiah considered their options. They could try to make a run for town, but that would mean traveling open country where they'd be easy targets. They could stay and fight, but if the men returned with reinforcements, they'd be outnumbered. "We wait," he said finally, "and we prepare." As night fell, Isaiah sent Theo to the barn to keep watch, while he and Rosa secured the house as best they could. They moved furniture to block the windows, loaded every weapon Isaiah owned, and prepared buckets of water in case the men tried to smoke them out. In the quiet moments between preparations, Isaiah found himself watching Rosa, her determined expression, the grace with which she moved, the trust she placed in him despite their inability to fully communicate. He had known her only a week, yet he felt a connection to her that defied explanation. "Rosa," he said softly as they sat at the kitchen table taking a brief rest. "Why did you trust me?" That first day, Rosa looked at him thoughtfully, searching for the words. "Your eyes," she said finally, pointing to her own. "Good eyes, kind." Isaiah felt a warmth spread through him at her words. "I won't let them take you," he promised. "Never." Rosa reached across the table and took his hand. "I know," she said simply. The touch of her hand in his sent a jolt through Isaiah, a feeling he had thought long forgotten. The sound of breaking glass shattered the moment. Isaiah was on his feet instantly, pulling Rosa down behind the table as a bottle sailed through the window, flames erupting from its cloth-wrapped neck as it hit the floor. "Fire!" Isaiah shouted, grabbing for one of the water buckets they had prepared. He doused the flames quickly, but another bottle crashed through a different window, then another. The air filled with smoke as Isaiah and Rosa frantically tried to extinguish the fires springing up around them. "Isaiah!" Theo's voice came from outside, followed by the crack of gunfire. "They're at the barn," Isaiah cursed, realizing the fire bottles had been a diversion. "Stay here," he ordered Rosa, grabbing his rifle and heading for the door. He paused, looking back at her frightened face. "Hide," he said. "I'll be back." Outside, the night was chaos. The barn was ablaze, orange flames licking at the dry wood. Theo was crouched behind a water trough, exchanging fire with shadowy figures near the corral. Isaiah ran to join him, ducking as a bullet whizzed past his head. "How many?" he asked Theo. "More than 3, the young man replied grimly. "They brought friends." Isaiah peered around the edge of the trough, counting 5, possibly 6 men using the corral fence as cover. They were pinned down, with the burning barn at their backs and no clear escape route. He fired a shot, satisfied to hear a yelp of pain in response, but knew they were outnumbered. A movement at the house caught his attention. Rosa had emerged onto the porch, a rifle in her hands, one of the extras he had loaded earlier. Before he could shout for her to get back inside, she raised the rifle and fired toward the corral. The shot went wide, but it drew the attention of the men, several of whom turned to fire at the house. "Rosa," Isaiah shouted, "get inside." But instead of retreating, Rosa darted off the porch and toward a stack of firewood that offered better cover. She fired again, this time hitting one of the men in the leg. He went down with a howl of pain. Isaiah felt a surge of both pride and fear. He hadn't known Rosa could handle a rifle, but her bravery was putting her in danger. He fired again, providing cover as she made it to the woodpile. The standoff continued for what felt like hours but was likely only minutes. Isaiah was down to his last few rounds when he heard a welcome sound, hoofbeats approaching from the direction of town, accompanied by shouts and the unmistakable voice of Sheriff Hollister. "This is the law. Drop your weapons." The men at the corral hesitated, then one by one began to throw down their guns as several riders appeared, their badges gleaming in the light from the burning barn. Isaiah let out a breath of relief, lowering his rifle as the sheriff and his deputies quickly took control of the situation. "You all right, Quinn?" Sheriff Hollister called, dismounting and approaching them. "We're fine," Isaiah replied, scanning for Rosa. He spotted her still crouched behind the woodpile, watching warily as the men who had pursued her were being handcuffed. "How did you know to come?" "Hank Wilkins rode into town, said he had a bad feeling about those men heading your way. Looks like he was right." The sheriff surveyed the burning barn and the bullet holes riddling the house. "Quite a fight you had here." Isaiah nodded grimly. "They wanted to take Rosa, the Italian woman I told you about." Sheriff Hollister's expression darkened. "Human trafficking," he said. "Been seeing more of it lately. Immigrants promised work, brought west, then sold or forced into labor or worse. He looked toward Rosa, who had cautiously emerged from her hiding place. "She's lucky you found her." Isaiah moved to Rosa's side, gently taking the rifle from her hands. "It's over," he said softly. "Safe now." Rosa looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the flames from the burning barn. "We fight good," she said, a small smile playing at her lips despite everything. Isaiah couldn't help but smile back. "Yes," he agreed, "we fight good." As the sheriff and his men led the captives away, promising to return in the morning to take statements, Isaiah, Rosa, and Theo surveyed the damage to the ranch. The barn was a lost cause, though they had managed to save the horses. The house had survived with minimal damage, some broken windows, bullet holes in the walls, and scorched floorboards where the fire bottles had landed. "Could have been worse," Theo observed, rubbing a smudge of soot from his cheek. Isaiah nodded, feeling suddenly exhausted as the tension of the night drained away. "Get some sleep, Theo," he said. "We'll start repairs in the morning." As Theo trudged off to his room, Isaiah turned to find Rosa watching him, her expression unreadable in the dim light of the single lantern they had lit. "You should rest too," he told her. "It's been a long night." Rosa stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his face. "You saved me," she said softly. "Again." Isaiah shook his head. "We saved each other," he corrected gently. "You fought bravely." Rosa smiled, a true smile that reached her eyes and made something in Isaiah's chest tighten. "In Italy," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully, "I learned to shoot. Father teach." Isaiah chuckled, surprised. "You're full of surprises, Rosa Esposito." She nodded, her expression growing serious again. "Isaiah," she said, placing a hand on his arm, "thank you for everything." The touch of her hand sent warmth spreading through him. Without thinking, Isaiah reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face. Rosa caught his hand, holding it against her cheek for a moment before letting go. "Good night," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Good night," Isaiah replied, watching as she retreated to her room, the door closing softly behind her. In the days that followed, they began the work of rebuilding. The sheriff returned as promised, taking their statements and informing them that the men who had attacked them would face charges not only for the assault on Isaiah's ranch, but for kidnapping and human trafficking. Rosa's testimony, limited as it was by the language barrier, was crucial to building the case against them. "They'll be in prison for a long time," Sheriff Hollister assured them. "Miss Esposito won't have to fear them anymore." Isaiah translated as best he could for Rosa, whose relief was evident in the way her shoulders relaxed for the first time since he had known her. "Free?" she asked, looking between Isaiah and the sheriff. "Yes," Isaiah confirmed. "Free." With the immediate danger past, Isaiah expected Rosa might want to leave to go east perhaps, where there were larger Italian communities, or even to return to Italy now that she had escaped the men who had brought her west. The thought of her leaving made his heart heavy in a way he hadn't anticipated, but Rosa showed no signs of wanting to go. Instead, she threw herself into helping rebuild the barn, learning new English words daily, and making the ranch house more of a home than it had been in years. She planted a small garden behind the kitchen, hung curtains she had sewn from fabric Isaiah brought from town, and filled the house with the sense of Italian cooking. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Isaiah found the courage to ask the question that had been on his mind. "Rosa," he said carefully, "now that you're safe, do you want to go back? To Italy or maybe east to New York?" Rosa looked at him, surprise evident in her expression. "You want me to go?" "No," Isaiah replied quickly, perhaps too quickly. "No, I don't want that, but I thought you might." Rosa was silent for a long moment, her gaze returning to the sunset painting the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and crimson. "I came to America for work," she said slowly, her English improving daily. "To help family. But here," she looked around at the ranch, at the new barn rising where the old one had burned. "Here feels like home now." Isaiah felt something tight in his chest loosen at her words. "I'm glad," he said simply. Rosa smiled, reaching over to place her hand over his where it rested on the arm of his chair. "You give me safe place," she said. "I stay and help make it good place." Isaiah turned his hand over, his fingers intertwining with hers. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, neither feeling the need for words to express what was growing between them. The new barn was completed just as summer gave way to fall. The whole community had come together to help with the raising, and the day ended with a celebration that brought people from miles around. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, a reminder of the bonds that held the scattered ranches and homesteads together in this harsh but beautiful land. Isaiah watched as Rosa moved among their neighbors, her English now good enough to hold simple conversations. She had been nervous about meeting so many people at once, but her warm smile and genuine interest in others quickly won them over. Even Mrs. Perkins from the general store, known for her initial coolness toward newcomers, had taken a liking to Rosa and was currently teaching her how to do a Virginia reel. "She fits in well," Theo commented, coming to stand beside Isaiah with a plate of food. "Never would have thought an Italian girl would take to Wyoming like she has." Isaiah nodded, unable to take his eyes off Rosa as she laughed, slightly breathless from the dance. "She's remarkable," he said softly. Theo glanced at him with a knowing smile. "You ought to tell her, boss." Isaiah tore his gaze away from Rosa to look at his young ranch hand. "Tell her what?" "That you're in love with her," Theo said matter-of-factly. "It's plain as day to everyone except maybe you two." Isaiah felt heat rise to his face. "It's not that simple, Theo." "Seems simple enough to me," Theo replied with a shrug. "Life's too short to waste time wondering." With that, he wandered off to join the dancing, leaving Isaiah to his thoughts. Was Theo right? Isaiah had been widowed for so long, had grown so accustomed to solitude, that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to love someone. But when he looked at Rosa, at her strength, her resilience, her joy in simple things, he felt something he had thought lost forever. As the evening wore on, the musicians began to play a slower tune. Isaiah watched as couples moved together beneath the stars, swaying to the gentle melody. He set down his drink and made his way through the crowd to where Rosa stood at the edge of the makeshift dance floor. "Would you dance with me?" he asked, offering his hand. Rosa looked up at him, surprise and pleasure mingling in her expression. "I not know how," she admitted. "I'll show you," Isaiah promised. "It's easy." Rosa placed her hand in his, allowing him to lead her onto the dance floor. Isaiah placed his other hand lightly on her waist, guiding her into the simple steps of the waltz. She followed his lead easily, her natural grace making up for her lack of experience. "See," Isaiah said softly, "you're a natural." Rosa smiled up at him, her eyes reflecting the lantern light. "Good teacher," she replied. As they moved together beneath the Wyoming sky, Isaiah felt something shift between them, a recognition, a possibility. The music seemed to fade around them until all he was aware of was Rosa in his arms, the warmth of her hand in his, the trust in her eyes. When the music ended, Isaiah didn't immediately let go. "Rosa," he began, his voice rougher than he intended. But before he could continue, one of the neighboring ranchers called for everyone's attention, announcing that it was time for the traditional bonfire to close out the barn raising. The moment was lost as people began to move toward the large pile of scrap wood that had been prepared for the occasion. Isaiah reluctantly released Rosa, but she kept hold of his hand as they joined the others gathering around the unlit bonfire. The rancher who had called for attention now stood atop a crate, a lit torch in his hand. "Before we light this fire," he called, "I want to thank Isaiah Quinn for being the kind of neighbor who would do the same for any of us in need. And I want to welcome Rosa Esposito to our community. May they both find happiness in the years to come." A cheer went up as the torch touched the bonfire, flames leaping upward into the night. Isaiah felt Rosa's hand tighten in his, and he looked down to find her watching him, not the fire. "Thank you," she said quietly, the firelight dancing in her eyes, "for everything." Isaiah shook his head. "You don't need to thank me, Rosa. Having you here," he paused, searching for the right words. "It's made everything better." Rosa's smile deepened, a hint of something new in her expression. "For me too," she replied. As the celebration wound down and people began to depart, Isaiah, Rosa, and Theo made their way back to the ranch house. Theo, claiming exhaustion, bid them good night and disappeared into his room, leaving Isaiah and Rosa alone in the main room. "It was a good day," Rosa said, moving to stoke the fire that had burned low during their absence. "Yes," Isaiah agreed, watching her as she moved around the room with a familiarity that spoke of how completely she had made this place her home. "Rosa," she turned to look at him, waiting. Isaiah took a deep breath. "When I found you on that trail," he began, "I never imagined how much you would change my life. This house was just a place I slept before. Now it's a home again." Rosa's expression softened. "Isaiah," she said, stepping closer, "I not have words in English." "Too hard to say." "Then say it in Italian," he suggested. "I might not understand the words, but hearts don't need words," Rosa finished for him, placing a hand over his heart. "You say this to me first day, remember?" Isaiah was startled. "I did." Rosa nodded. "Not with words," she explained. "With eyes, with hands, with how you help me when not know me." She stepped closer still. "You speak with heart. I understand." Isaiah felt something inside him break open, a flood of emotion he had held back for too long. He reached out, cradling her face in his hands. "Rosa Esposito," he said softly, "I love you." Rosa's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Ti amo, Isaiah Quinn," she replied. "I love you too." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home after a long journey. Rosa's arms wound around his neck, holding him close as if she feared he might disappear. Isaiah poured everything he couldn't say into that kiss, his admiration for her courage, his joy in her presence, his hope for their future together. When they finally parted, Rosa rested her forehead against his, her eyes closed, a smile playing at her lips. "See," she said softly, "no need words." Isaiah laughed quietly, happiness bubbling up inside him like a spring. "No," he agreed, "but I'm going to say it anyway, in every language I can learn. I love you, Rosa." "I love you, Isaiah," she replied, the English words careful but clear. "Always." They were married the following spring, in a ceremony that combined American traditions with touches of Italian culture that Rosa had described to the women who helped her prepare. The whole community turned out for the celebration, which lasted well into the night. Sheriff Hollister, who had become a friend in the month since the attack on the ranch, brought news that the men who had trafficked Rosa had been convicted and sentenced to lengthy prison terms. It was the final piece of Rosa's old life falling into place, allowing her to fully embrace her new one. "You never have to fear them again," Isaiah told her as they danced beneath a canopy of stars at their wedding celebration. "You're safe now." Rosa smiled up at him, radiant in a dress she had made herself. "I know," she said simply, "with you always safe." In the years that followed, the Quinn ranch prospered. Isaiah and Rosa worked side by side, her knowledge of plants adding a thriving vegetable garden to their operations, his skill with cattle building a respected herd. They added a room to the house when their first child, a son they named Marco, was born 2 years after their marriage. A daughter, Sophia, followed 3 years later. Rosa never lost her accent, but her English grew fluent, peppered with Italian phrases that gradually became part of the family's private language. Isaiah learned enough Italian to communicate with Rosa's family through letters, and they saved carefully to bring her parents and brothers to visit when the children were old enough to know their Italian grandparents. On quiet evenings, after the children were asleep, Isaiah and Rosa would often sit on the porch, watching the Wyoming sunset just as they had in those early days. Sometimes they would talk about the future, about their hopes for their children, about improvements to the ranch. Sometimes they would simply sit in comfortable silence, hands linked, no words needed between them. "You ever regret it?" Isaiah asked her one such evening, nearly 10 years after they had met. "Staying here so far from Italy." Rosa looked at him, the sunset gilding her face with golden light. The years had added a few lines around her eyes, a few strands of silver to her dark hair, but to Isaiah she was more beautiful than ever. "Never," she said firmly. "This is home now. You, the children, this land," she gestured to the ranch spreading out before them, to the mountains in the distance. "This is where I belong." Isaiah squeezed her hand, his heart full. "I'm grateful every day that you found your way here," he said. "That we found a way to understand each other, even when words failed." Rosa smiled, the same smile that had captured his heart all those years ago. "Hearts don't need words," she reminded him, leaning in to kiss him softly. "They only need to listen." As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, and the first stars appeared in the Wyoming sky, Isaiah held his wife close, thinking of all the twists of fate that had brought them together, a desperate escape, a chance meeting on a dusty trail, a decision to help a stranger when it would have been easier to ride away. Their story had not been an easy one, but it had brought them here to this moment, to the life they had built together. And as Rosa had said, hearts don't need words to understand what matters most. They only need to listen to the quiet whispers of love that transcend language, to the silent promises made and kept through the years, to the unspoken connection that had drawn them together from the very beginning. It was enough. It had always been enough. As the evening deepened into night, Isaiah and Rosa Quinn returned to the warmth of the home they had made together, to the family they had created, to the love that had bridged the gap between their worlds. And in the quiet moments before sleep claimed them, they held each other close, speaking the language of the heart that had brought them together across oceans, across prairies, across all the barriers that might have kept them apart. In the vast expanse of the Wyoming Territory, under an endless sky that matched the boundlessness of their love, they had found each other. And in the end, that was the only story that mattered.